Welcome, one and all, to a Niagara Broadsword Academy historical supplement video. I hope everyone is remembering to stretch and equip themselves appropriately for both practice and for learning. Today, we're going to start an absurdly summarized overview of the life of one of the most wild, outrageous, and bombastic figures in the history of the sword. The iconic 17th century gambler, innkeep, soldier, duelist, swordmaster, author, and pimp. I think that's all of it. McBane.
Nice to see you.
No. Donald. Oh God, no. McBane. Donald McBane. That guy. Alright. Everybody buckle up. It's about to get wild.
Another shoot 'em up, push him through the plate glass window, splatterfest from the Hollywood cookie cutter.
Donald McBane was born in Inverness, Scotland in 1664. In his book, The Expert Swordsman's Companion, which is about half instruction on various contemporary combat techniques and half autobiography of his flat-out bonkers life, he has this to say about his youth. I was always wild, and would not wait on the schools, which I find is to my great loss this day. He began his apprenticeship as a tobacco spinner, which is some kind of job. Like all hard work, he hated it. When his boss began to get stingy on the meals, he just took off and joined the independent companies within the army, because comparatively I assume that was an easy ride, especially soldiering in the late 17th century. With almost no training, armed with only a musket and a wooden-handled bayonet, he began his first battle, the Battle of MARLBOROUGH'S. The MacDonalds came down the hill upon us without either shoe, stocking, or bonnet on their head, wrote McBane in his autobiography. Seeing my captain sore wounded, and a great many more with heads lying cloven on every side, I was sadly affrighted, never having seen the like before. I took my heels and run 30 miles before I looked behind me, beginning a practice that would serve him well over the course of his career. Not long after regrouping with the rest of his company, he engaged in his second battle, the Battle of Killiecrankie. After lining up for battle, McBane and his compatriots shouted at the Jacobites, daring them to advance, which they then did, which went extremely poorly for McBane. It caused the Highland men to advance on us like madmen, without shoe or stocking, and were in the middle of us before we could fire 3 shots apiece, broke us, and obliged us to retreat. I fled to the baggage and took a horse, but he was pursued by a broadsword and targe-wielding Highlander. After a quick bout of chase me around the horse, the Highlander drew his pistol on McBane, and in his customary bravery, McBane fled the scene. In his escape along the pass at Killiecrankie, he came to a gap between 2 rocks, 18 feet across, which he decided was a reasonable distance for a man to jump. After abandoning his hat and his musket on one side, and his shoe at about the midway point, he landed safely on the other side of what is now called Soldier's Leap, and proceeded to Dunkle in safety. Having survived his second battle, the still uneducated enlisted man McBane was sent to help build Fort William, a place he will spend several years at, and also where he will have what he calls his first adventure with the sword in 1692. Because he was uneducated, an older soldier was given control of his pay and, to no one's surprise, actually gave McBane very, very little of it. Upon being asked for more of his own money, the older soldier's customary response was to clock McBane squarely in the head. Custom dictated that disputes between soldiers were to be resolved by the sword. Unfortunately, McBane had neither a sword nor any idea of how one was used, unlike his tormentor. Luckily, McBane was able to borrow a little money from a friend and bribe another officer for 2 weeks of lessons in private, and also borrowed his friend's small sword. Armed with both knowledge and arms, he then goaded the older soldier in command of his finances into a duel behind the garrison. Within 2 turns, McBane was disarmed and, you guessed it, running away. The old soldier, however, was no slouch, and caught him up, beat him, and took the borrowed small sword in order to pawn it for booze money. His friend was understandably upset. So, obviously, the next day, after receiving a small amount of coaching on the specifics of how to best a broadsword with a small sword, he stole his friend's other small sword and challenged the old soldier once again. This time, he slips the leg and proceeds to stab his tormentor twice. Once in the body, once in the leg. That way he can't pursue McBane should he have to employ his personal technique. Having won the duel, he took the man's sword to the canteen, retrieved his friend's sword in exchange for it, and returned both to their rightful owner. Presumably before the rightful owner realized that he had in fact stolen his second sword. After a few years of gambling, sword fighting, and occasional soldiering, there was a draft for soldiers for the 9 Years' War. So in 1695, McBane found himself escorting a group of his fellows to the boats that would take them to Flanders to join the 9 Years' War. He wasn't going, but a couple of his friends were, and apparently his boss was concerned that they might, ditch. Since he wasn't a part of the draft, just escorting some friends, he decides to have one last great party with them. He, in fact, partied so hard that the next day he woke up with a wicked hangover exacerbated by the seasickness he was feeling, having fallen asleep on the boat and woken up halfway to Holland. At this, McBane presumably shrugs and goes back to drinking while he can. After arriving in Holland and getting set up, going on the march, McBane helped lay siege to the city of Namur. He was able to storm the city 5 times without injury. Unfortunately, he stormed the city 6 times. On his final attempt, he was shot thrice and stabbed by bayonet 6 times, severely depleting his ability to employ his personal technique and run away. However, it did give him a unique perspective on battle, in that they won, and he was able to see what happens when a battle finishes and you're there. Not over long after that battle, he returned to England after his former captain at Fort William spotted him on the campaign and complained to his current superior officer that he had abandoned his post and belonged back in Fort William. Shortly thereafter, he left the military and returned to his beloved mother in Inverness, who promptly kicked him out for being a lazy lout. So off he goes again and joins the Earl of Angus's regiment in Perth as a pikeman. After skipping guard duty one day because McBane, he was called out for it by his corporal with a slight beating. The dishonor of being asked not to skip work when you're scheduled caused his Highland blood to warm, and he challenged the corporal to a highly illegal duel. The two men agreed to meet at a discreet point far from the fort at which they were stationed, and far from prying eyes. After years of training and practice, McBane is no slouch with a sword anymore, and he manages within a few exchanges to wound his opponent. Unfortunately, it's not just a scratch.
'Tis but a scratch.
In fact, he mortally stabs the corporal, who complains that it was a real rogue move, bud, before telling him to run, as the duel was agreed to in good faith, and they both know that McBane will be killed for participating. Well, killed for murder, because he murdered his corporal in an illegal duel. But for once, perhaps for the first time in his life, McBane does not turn and run. He does not abandon his corporal to die slowly in the woods. Not until he asks if he has, any money? Because being on the run is expensive, and it's not like you're going to use it. Lucky for him, the corporal is an exceptionally good dude and gives him all the money that he has on hand. And then McBane runs directly into his superior officer, who's quite curious why a blood-soaked enlisted man is hurrying down the road away from the fort. When McBane explains himself, the officer, presumably with a "that's rough, buddy," sends McBane on his way with a gold coin and a recommendation to the head of the fortifications at Glasgow. Because McBane's superpower, I guess, is luck. He also non-fatally stabs a pair of army recruiters on the road to his boat, just in case. After getting set up in Ireland, he gets tricked by a prostitute and fights a pimp. Then he gets into an argument with a French foil master about which is better, the foil or the small sword, something that I feel we can all relate to. And naturally, they settle it with a fight and a bet. He wounds the foil fencer 3 times, they get drunk, and remain BFFs. 1 month after that illegal duel, McBane moves to Limerick, where he will begin the next major phase of his career. First, he tricks a farmer's underage daughter into believing they're married in order to scam her out of 20 gold coins and presumably other stuff, because McBane is... hang on, it's in one of these. Is it this guy? Yeah, right here. Yeah, that's right. A piece of shit. But after that horrifying episode, he begins a series of duels with all the local masters of the various schools in Limerick, soundly beating them one after another, until he realizes, hey, I'm better than all these stuffy sword schmucks. I should start my own school here, with blackjack and hookers.
I'm gonna go build my own theme park with blackjack and hookers.
And next time, we'll get into how well that plan shakes out. Thanks for joining us today on this extremely simplified look at the first part of the life of the legendary cad, Donald McBane.
Meeting adjourned.
$2.50 for this?
Quit it! Until next time, stay safe, wash your hands, practice your footwork.
The rules that constrain other men mean nothing to McBane.